there's a guy that says originality. So whatever I put down here is weighted by a factor of 50. Okay. So, and those, that's the only box in which the scores can get less than 0. I've had people get -5s in that box, okay? Because all they did was cut and paste from the web. But, so, and the prototypes count double. So so for each prototype, you have 3 cells. And so if you got 5, 5, and 5, this would actually be 10, 10, and 10. Okay. So integrating your prototype stuff into the report is important and emphasized. Everything else, these areas count the same as these others. These shaded areas aren't weighted more heavily. They're more important. You want to spend your time there. But basically, it'll be, here's where you really want to spend most of your time from a conceptual point of view. So, and then what I do is I add up the whole score. And typically, they might range from, in the class, probably the lowest will be around 60 or 70, and the highest might be 450. And what I do is I take a project and I say, that project ought to be about 100. And I take a project and say, that project ought to be about a 60. And then I do a linear mapping of the scores so that the project that I picked out to be 100, its score, whatever it is, maps to 100. The project I picked out is a 60, its score maps to 60, and everything maps linearly relative to that, okay? That's the way the scores are. Now, I will occasionally, very rarely, tweak the grades a little bit. If I think somebody did a really great job, but the scoring system didn't, kind of didn't emphasize the part that they did so well or something, then I might tweak it a little bit. So I apply some judgment to that, but mostly it's based on just this linear mapping. So what I'm doing here, mostly, I'm making judgments in each of these cells. I take your report and I just, I'm marking cells that are appropriate. Now, very often in somebody's report, some section, it may actually be, it could be assigned to this cell or assigned to that cell, okay? And so I just make a choice. Sometimes you'll talk about things that I haven't, and I'll, over here there was some others, and so I'll just put a new, I'll put your category, whatever you were, talking about. So, does that make sense?
Does that one follow-up question?
Sure.
On the grades you mentioned, the messages and commas too of this section that we should be emphasizing?
Yeah.
The messages and
Yep.
columns. What different kind of analysis are you expecting from the two?
Well, the messages, I expect you to have a message catalog. And so you're saying, these two guys have to communicate, they're going to send us kind of message. So you have, message name, to, from, and a little thing about here's the information it's conveying.
So maybe a table of that?
Yeah, a message table would be a really good thing to do. That makes it clear and helps people, and that helps people understand how your system's going to work, how information flows around the system. Okay.
And Tom?
It's pretty much describing what we did in Project 4, not so much the testing, but what we did in Project 4, how it's going to work. Your job is to describe the storage management system, and my view of the storage management system is really it's the NoSQL database, COM, plus wrappers around those parts so that the servers have this nice data management system. In other words, they shouldn't have to know about Query Manager. Okay, so I've called those data managers. It's just the code that wraps COM and NoSQL, and the data manager for repository won't be the same code as the data manager for test harness. Okay. Good questions. Other questions? Yes.
What should we call in the service integration?
So the integration is all about how are we going to shape this data management service for this particular activity. And so when we talk about the repository, we're saying here's what the repository has to do. When we talk about the integration with the repository, we say, now we're going to need these kinds of data elements. So for example, we need a check-in closed field, Boolean field in the metadata. We may need other fields. You know, you think about it. Think about what we're going to do. We're going to manage code. We want people to be able to explore through the code. Okay. We need to manage check-in and check-out. Okay. There may not be a check-out. If you use single ownership policy, there is no reason to have check-out. Check-out is all about making sure that if 3 people check it out, then it doesn't get checked back in until they're merged. And I hate branch and merge, okay? And so the single ownership policy, I would have a check-in and an extraction. Anybody can extract, okay? So extraction is like a check-out, but without any bookkeeping to keep track of who's checking it out. Anybody can check it out, okay? But only the owner can check it in. So you know, however we have to shape that database to do that, we will. Now, for the collaboration server, remember we were talking about it being important to keep latency as low as we can, especially when we're doing this whiteboard, you know, this distributed Visio kind of thing. Okay, only I hope our whiteboard is a little easier to use than Visio. Visio used to be the most elegant, easy to use, beautiful tool when the Visio Corp had it. They sold it to Microsoft and it progressively got more and more complicated, harder to use, more and more features, harder to use, built in this clunky model behind it, hard to use. You want to change the shape, it won't let you change the shape. You want to put the box here and it wiggles everything around, you know, way to go. So, but to get back to the questions, okay. That latency is really important because if you're drawing in Mumbai and I'm here in Syracuse and we're collaborating on a whiteboard, if I have to wait 2 minutes to see your line come, that's useless. So latency is really important. So we're going to want to be able to have a direct client-to-client link without going through this, you know. So our storage management system is doing a lot of handling for us to make it easy. But in this case, we're going to bypass all that and go directly client to client, okay? Just a direct connect. So somehow, you know, we have to keep track of that's what's going on. These messages go on that direct channel. None of the other ones do. They all go through. So if I ask for a document, that goes through the normal channels and the normal management, okay? And when I set up this remote whiteboarding, that's going through the normal channel, but then it opens a direct channel to your machine, on my machine, and from my machine to your machine, and everybody else, and the system has to know who's involved. You know? Is Ajish there, part of our group, and collaborating? If so, his machine's got to be getting all those messages too. All right? And we'll probably want to make special messages. Really tiny little messages, okay? The least amount of information necessary to support that. And we may have other information about that drawing going through the normal route, you know, bigger, fatter messages, more information, but it doesn't matter if they get there immediately or not, okay? Open a new document or something. Did I answer the question? So that integration is all about shaping the use of these tools to that particular application. ideally, as much of the, you'd like to have a lot of the data, the storage management system common to everybody, but clearly there will be wrappers or extenders or whatever that configured just for that application. Yes? Ruben.
Could you elaborate on file caching on the client?
File caching on the client, sure. So, when the client asks to do an extraction, it says, I want the display. Give me display package. And it turns out the display package depends on 7 other packages. And so, if I use a push model, the repository just pushes those 7 packages to me. Bang, 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 bang. Okay? Well, I already have 4 of them. Why do I want to send those over the network again? So instead, we can, using a pull model, I say, give me the display system. What it sends back is a list of the components on the display system. And then I ask for all the ones that I don't have in my file cache. So the file cache is just a directory, or maybe it's just a dictionary telling me where stuff, I have this element, so I'm not going to ask for it again. Now, the versioning is important here, because you want to get the correct version. It's not just the. But in the repository, my mental model of the repository is that let's say Query Manager version 5 is a different file than Query Manager version 3. So when I ask for Query Manager 5, it's just a different file. So I don't have to, there's no versioning, it's just a different file. Okay. What that means is that I either store them with the versioning in the name, or I have a registry of everything that has the versioning in its key. Okay. So either way. And there's advantages to doing both. If I make it part of the name, then when I extract it, I have to change the names. Because I don't want my system to break because I'm making references to this component and I got a new version that says, no, you don't have it. Okay. So there's some things to think about. Do you want to spend your time thinking about that? It's useful thing to think about. But our main goal is not the repository. Our main goal is the storage management system as the repository and the test harness and collaboration server and build server will use it.
Also, could you elaborate on policies as well?
Yeah. So the single ownership for the repository is a policy, not the only possible one. And there's some organization they just disagree with me. Linus Torvalds would say, you're full of bull. That is the way to do it. You branch and merge. Every fool knows that. Okay. So you'd like to be able to configure the system so that you can use whatever policies are appropriate for your engineering organization's style of doing work.
So these policies are basically rules.
Yeah, the mental model is very like the parser with installable rules and actions. I think you probably would have installable rules and actions. It's easier to say than do. You need to think about, how is this really going to work? How is this really going to work? But I think probably what you'd wind up doing is installing. You might have a check-in package, and so there's a base check-in, and then implement a different policy. That's one way to implement different policies. Maybe not the easiest. It would be nice if we could just plug in a policy as a template argument or something, or a generic parameter.
JVPM. Have you ever used JVPM? JBoss Project Manager.
Yeah, maybe. I don't want us to. It's fine to say, hey, look there's these open source stuff that are really cool. I like the way they work, and so you can design your models around that. But don't just say I'm going to use JBoss. Okay. So I want you to lay it out, but it's perfectly okay to pick them, something that you like and you think works real well as a model. But does JBoss give you plugins?
Exactly. JBoss is just like a if-else structure to call it like very simply.
Okay.
It just makes your packages and puts them into rules.
Oh, okay,
It
cool.
lets you allow to invoke those packages based on the rule.
So that says that if you want to talk about policies, it might serve you to go look at JBoss website and look at their docs a little bit and see how they do it. That's a good use of the web. A great use of the web is to go see how some other people are doing stuff, and if you like the idea, paraphrase the idea. It's your idea, but colored by that experience of, rather than just going and grabbing something from the. Don't go to the web and cut and paste into them. I will see it, and your originality score will plummet.
To follow up on that question, like if these policies has to be system-wide or they could be server-specific,
I think they're likely. I think there's likely to be some system-wide policies, and there's also likely to be some local policies, server-specific policies. The check-in policy surely is a repository policy. It might affect clients, but it wouldn't affect test harness. Other questions? Yes, payment.
What's the difference between the storage management system and the storage management service?
So the intent here is that this is just a high-level discussion of you're saying, this is what we want out of this thing. It's just not really talking about any of the details. And then here in the storage management, we're talking, here's how we're going to implement it. I don't mean all the code stuff, but I mean, here are the packages, here's the rule, here's the, whatever, here's the structure, here's how we're going to implement it. And this integration is all about how we make this fit with this. Okay? So, high-level description, details here, and then this tells us how these details map onto individual servers. Now, understand this is my mental model of how to organize it. You don't have to organize it that way. This is just, okay. But I am going to use this to evaluate, so what that means is that it's a little more direct for me to evaluate it, if you use that structure, but you have no obligation to use that structure. And it's, I will sort it out. I'll find a way to make it fit into my evaluation, however you do it. All right. Was another question over here? Yeah.
Question about repository server. Do we have to store the package that doesn't pass the test?
So that's a good question. I would, but I would, I think maybe in the metadata, I would, so each package is going to be, so if we're using, so my mental model is we'll use the NoSQL database to keep track of where the packages are. So its payload is an address, a directory on our server. And one of the fields in the metadata is whether the check-in is closed, but it would make a whole lot of sense to have another field that says this hasn't passed test yet. Okay.
So,
there's another mental model, and that says we won't check it in until you can demonstrate that it passes test. That's a different policy, and it makes all the sense in the world. If that's the policy you want to have, great. So I think you would use one or the other. Okay. Now there's a middle ground, and this is probably what I would do. There's a middle ground, and that is that you have what amounts to a temporary store that you have a place to put them. You can put them in, but they haven't. The check-in hasn't closed yet. The tests haven't passed yet. And so on. But they're there where everybody can get at them and see them. So that way, I put something up, and I want to tell one of my team members, I'm having this problem with it, can you go take a look at it? And he goes and gets it. Instead of me sending it via email or over the network or something, he just goes to the repository and gets it. But if you're going to do that, there ought to be some way of saying this is temporary. And it doesn't have to be a special directory. It could be, again, be another field, one of these fields in the metadata that just says, this is not a certified component yet. It's not, you know, it's not closed. It's not passing tests, so it's not certified. Good question.
When you're talking about the various components like the repository server, the collaboration server, the HANA server, are we only talking about it with relation to the storage management subsystem?
Well, so you need to talk about it at a modest level of detail about its functionality, what it does, what does this guy do, so that when you talk about integration, it makes sense. But the bulk of our concern with the repository and the other servers are how it interacts with the data, with the storage management system. Okay. So.
Dr. Fawcett.
1 second, I got a little technical thing to take care of. Yes.
So should we state an assumption like we're expecting all teams from different parts of the country to use the same user interface because they may have language differences?
Oh, that's a good question, you know. But I think if we're going to collaborate, probably it's hard to collaborate unless we're using the same language.
Well, for example, like check-ins. So, should we state that as an assumption, or would you be upset? Like you expect people?
I think that's an interesting issue. I think probably the best thing to do with that is to list it as a critical issue. Hey, this is a distributed system. Hey, it's collaboration. Hey, we may be collaborating with somebody that doesn't speak English. What are we going to do about it? And then discuss it a little bit. I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time. That's a very practical but essentially non-technical issue. It's very important. It's an important issue. It's a usability issue, but it isn't so much a computer engineering issue.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm asking is I would like to write assumptions. I just am not sure if they're appropriate for the system.
I think it's entirely appropriate.
And one of the reasons why I mentioned that is the time zones as well.
Yeah.
There may be a holiday
Sure.
in another place.
Sure.
So if an agent is going and, okay.
Absolutely. So what that, so, you know, there's a little issue to explore a little bit. So here we are working on different time zones, and we do have these language issues and stuff. You might want to provide the capability to record a session. So a group in Mumbai is interacting, and we're all asleep, but we'd like to know more about that interaction, and so there's a way to record that and save it, and
Sure.
you know, so that would make a lot of sense.
Thank you. Well, one of the other questions I had about time zones is if the agent is going to, I don't know, check in or log during the downtime,
Mm-hmm.
how can, and use the repository, that may be the prime time for another team.
Yeah.
How do real systems handle that?
I don't think that's going to be a problem because it turns out the repository is not going to be very heavily loaded. We'll see on Monday. I'm going to talk about this a little on Monday. The test harness is a guy that's really heavily loaded.
Or the test harness, for example, because my
Well, that's great.
thing is
Because,
downtime versus prime
now
time.
what you've done is you've distributed the load across 24 hours. So that's a good thing, not bad thing. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about baseline management?
Yeah, so that's not much more than what the repository does. So baseline is all of the source code, certified source code, and the certified documents. And certified means they're full-up members of the repository. So they're not temporary, okay, but they passed enough of the testing and checking all that sort of stuff so that they're full-up members of the repository. And now that baseline management is really just the policies you're going to use about ownership policy and versioning policy and all that sort of stuff. And mostly we're interested in how that interacts with the data management, with the storage management system. How do we want to shape the storage management system so that it supports that kind of stuff? There's some seats down here. There's 3 seats down here in the front row, guys. If you want to, you're welcome to come and grab them. So, and there's a seat over there too. Yes. No. I talked about it just to give you that key point about the loading, that you probably want to do your best to keep the load factor under 0.25. And that's one thing you can talk about. I'm going to talk more about it on Monday, and I think that'll give you some ideas. I don't think it'll change anything about the main flow of your document, but it'll be some interesting additive material in a couple of sections you can put in. So I think wait until Monday to hear how all that rolls out is fine. But yeah.
Also, could you talk about the testing activity? How will testing a module activity go?
I hadn't planned on saying anything much more than I already had. The mental model is fairly straightforward. It is and it isn't. There's 2 kinds of things that have to happen. One is that the developer has a family of packages she's working on, and she wants to install it in the repository and run it through the test harness. And she creates test drivers. And one policy, by the way, is for check-in is you can't check it in unless you have test drivers. Test drivers have to be part of it. But and the test drivers really are just her testing of that, kind of like a automated unit test. But the other form of testing is background regression testing, where we're testing everything together, and it's a whole suite of tests that runs, and it starts at the bottom, and it flows stuff up. And the idea is this. See, if I change something low down on everybody's dependency chain, I can break stuff above me. And there may be hundreds of modules, and I could figure out and just test those individual ones, but I might spend more time, when I test 17 modules, what's all your dependencies, and sorting all that out so that I tested fewer things. I might spend more time doing that than if I just tested everything. So my model, would be this, do the simplest thing that works, and the simplest thing that works is simply to test from the bottom up. So, and you don't know, when you're adding stuff, you don't want to have to keep track of, is this the top level, bottom level? It's just, I added something, so periodically we're just going to bottom up. So we start at the low level, test all those guys, and then test all the next level guys, and then test all the next level guys, and test all the, that's what this suite of testing is going to do. So there are 2 different testing schemas. One really is an automated unit test, and the other really is an automated integration regression test. Okay, and it's the latter that causes the load to blossom on as we'll see on Monday. It causes the load to blossom on the test harnesses.
And the baseline test is the same as regression test?
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
could we we can design it that way that the code which is checked into the repository, that should be the unit tested, and so that it's we have ensured that the code is tested, and now we will be testing it for the integration with other modules.
Yeah, so that's why I said you might choose to not allow a check-in until there was test drivers with it. But you can't, the repository, you shouldn't try to have the repository say, this is a good test, this will work, yeah, I'll accept this. That takes human intelligence and don't try to make a machine, unless you're in the deep learning
artificial
area.
intelligence.
Don't ask the machine to do human things, keep it simple. Just say, you gotta have a test driver in order for you to check this in. I won't let you check it in without a test driver. And you got to think a little bit about how's that going to work. Suppose that I have a test driver already, and I've done a check-in on stuff, and now I want to add another module. So I'm going to change one module to call a new module. Do I have to? And this test driver, by the way, works just fine. So I shouldn't be forced to put in another test driver. So basically, I think, what you would do is, in the check-in, say, have a way of identifying test drivers by name, maybe, or somehow. And if you don't have it, then explicitly, before you do the check-in, say, ask the user, is there a test driver already installed? Identify the test driver already that's checked into the repository already, that's going to test this. Okay. And then you could follow that up with a tool. There are code analysis tools, and you could once a week sweep through and say, are these developers lying to me that this module really doesn't have a test? There's nobody that's testing this. So it's a whole bunch of things you can do, but mostly you want to do the simple thing, before you. There's a lot of things you do as the system is maturing and you're layering on, more and more effective tools. Right now, we want to keep it relatively simple. So think about that as, it's something to discuss and maybe an issue to raise.
To follow up on that, these test drivers are specific to the test package.
There's two kinds of test drivers. There's a test driver for automated unit test, and there's a test driver for the regression testing.
So that won't be associated with any particular check-in. That could be directly present into the test harness, right? Because that is an integration sort of thing.
You could. Your flow could be that I've got to test this stuff on the test harness before I'll check it in. My mental model is that the test harness only tests it draws from the repository. And that model is only driven by, I know the test harnesses are going to get overloaded, and I don't want the developers to be doing a whole bunch of testing on the test harness that they could do perfectly well on their desktops. Okay, so I would probably do it the other way, but just driven by that.
Dr. Fawcett.
Yes. Okay.
When you're envisioning collaborative software, do you see users have updates in the morning? You know how Windows updates automatically? Or do you envision notifications like Twitter?
Notifications. I would do a notification. I wouldn't push stuff onto the clients. I would do notifications.
Okay.
So every time, what that means is that you have the dependency structure. So let's suppose I've installed a new version of some module.
Yes.
Now, because I have a dependency, it's fairly easy, even if I don't have parent links. I don't like parent links. Even if I don't have them, it's really quite easy to sweep through and find out all the parents. Mm-hmm. All you got to do is find all the children and invert that relationship, and it turns out that's really easy to do. Mm-hmm. And so when you know all the parents of this element, you just send a notification to the owners of each one of the parents. So this package that you depend on has changed to this new version.
So when we say collaborative, is that a separate system, or is that taken care of in agents? Because the agents are sweeping every night.
Okay, so the collaboration server is not about that. So the whole system, the whole federation is concerned with collaboration, so providing tools for people to work together developing software. But the collaboration server itself is where we're holding the management stuff, like the work plans and the schedules and things like that, and setting up virtual meetings and all that kind of stuff. That's what happens on the collaboration server. But the whole system is supposed to be support collaboration. Yes,
Could
Ajit.
you please brief on event managers? Are they centralized or decentralized?
That's up to you. You can do it either way. Understand that having a distributed system, if things are totally distributed, it's really easy to scale out. Except that there's a little bit of information that has to be centralized, I think, like who's up and running, just so people can find that new server that you scaled out. And again, as at the beginning, we talked about there being pieces of information that everybody needs to get at, so maybe you'd want to store that. So you might have a common set of data and events and stuff held somewhere, and then stuff on each of the servers. And that common stuff would probably go on the collaboration server, or could have its own server, but whatever. I do think that it's almost certain that the system can't be totally distributed and probably shouldn't be totally centralized. I think mostly distributed with a little bit of central stuff is a good scheme. Suppose the designer of the web had said, oh, we got to have a controller. We need to have a centralized. It never would have worked, ever. Okay. You wouldn't be sending email and surfing the web and stuff. It wouldn't work. So this, distributed. It takes distributing almost everything to get good scale out properties. But in a system like this, where even the web does have some centralized stuff. The DNS system, the domain name lookup, is centralized. It's hierarchical. It's distributed, but kind of halfway in between. All right. Other questions? Payment.
Does the existing system has any storage right now? Like, where is the data goes?
So let me rephrase your question to see if I'm answering the right question. I think your question is, so this system already exists and we're adding the storage management system to it, we're retrofitting the storage management system to it. That's not necessarily my attitude about this. My attitude is more like, we're part of a team that's putting together this federation, and our job is the storage management part. So it may be that there isn't any. We get to specify how data is stored over the entire system. There isn't any already existing stuff that we have to deal with. Okay, that makes your life a little easier. And what you're posing is a really interesting question, and very typical of what you get when you're at work. Very often you are making modifications to an existing system. Very, very typical. But here, I would like to have you let your imaginations not be quite so constrained by those realities. Jay.
So, based on what he said, when we're describing our users, is it appropriate to put like an imaginary business case in there? Just like you said, we are imagining teams across,
I would, so the cases here, the business case here would be a project, software development project, because that's what this system is all about, supporting software development. Okay, so Now, there are a few business cases for a system like this. In the days when I was working on radar systems, we used to build development facilities for our customers, but we didn't have a really good way to do that. We had our, because of the time when this technology was put together, we couldn't use off-the-shelf commercial stuff. We built our own processors. We even wrote our own languages and all kinds of stuff. It's crazy. But and so maintaining that was very difficult for customers, and so we would wind up building and provisioning them. We would either do the maintenance for them or provision them to do the maintenance, and both were big, major, hard tasks, much harder than it would be with this kind of system. So your model could be this customer has bought a large system from us, and now we're going to package up and deploy this system for them to maintain it. And that would be a wonderful thing to do. If we had that, we would have totally captured the entire radar market. Everybody else would go out of business, because that was an existing very big problem across the whole industry, at least the level of radars we were building. Okay.
Sure, but
So it's good.
Exactly, and there's got to be something to explain why we make decisions. Like, I'll give you an example. I decided that in my project 1 it would persist every 30 seconds. The TA wanted to know why. Well, I was thinking, I could explain why, because this person may have problems with their,
Well, okay, so
with their connection.
You could have made the time configurable, and then the question goes away.
But I would explain either way why, with a description or problem.
You definitely want to have an operation scenario, but understanding that a team using this provides all the scenario you really need. It really does, because this is what it's for. Okay. Other questions? Yes, Majush.
Where do we store build libraries? Is this in
So I've left that up to you. That could be in the repository, it could be in the test harness, it could be in the build server. One very sensible solution would be to have a build server that built and cached the built libraries and kept track of, when a new one was, it kept track of that, which one was current and so on. That doesn't necessarily mean it's on a different machine. You might have a virtual repository and a virtual build server on the same physical piece of hardware, okay? But that would be a very plausible thing to do. But there's lots of solutions to that. But I think having the build server manage that is a nice single responsibility principle way of doing it. Nice, that's what this guy does.
Dr. Fawcett, I think I understand now. When you just say build server, you actually mean hardware. So because based on your electrical background, a lot of things we're talking about are hardware implementations like repository.
My mental model is that the repository is one or more computers. The test harness is one or more computers.
But the repository is also not like a name of a software system like Windows 10 for repositories. You're not thinking of it.
It's both.
Like that. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
The repository is I put a computer over here and I say repository. It's not a repository until it has that software system installed on it and interacting with all the other parts. So it's more the software system than the hardware. I happen to think that it's likely that there will be separate machines for repository and collaboration.
Yes.
But it's really the software.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Chung-Yu.
Could you tell me approximately for moderate size product, how many machines may be necessary for the repository server?
I think probably the repository, even for a fairly large project, a single project, you'd have one repository server, one build server, one collaboration server, and 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 test harnesses, is my guess. Okay, But if this could be, you know, here we are, Lockheed Martin or Boeing or somebody, and we got tons of projects going on all the time. We're going to adopt this as our software development infrastructure. So now I would probably have a company repository where I'm saving all of the stuff that's generally of value to all projects. You know, so every time a project finishes up, review committee goes, sits down and says, what are the really important parts that are useful on other projects? And they all get funneled up to the company repository so that we don't start every project from scratch. Okay. You know, that company repository would probably have its own test harness, you know, and stuff like that, because, so, you know, there probably, if your model is that a company is going to adopt this as the infrastructure, there's probably a hierarchy. You probably have a company, you know, system, and then each project, you know, maybe I've got 10 projects currently going on now, and each one of those projects has their own federation. So we have a federation of federations. Yes?
To clarify, so, like, let me show you this diagram again, because I'm having trouble understanding this.
Okay.
So
let me pull this diagram up for everybody, so everybody can hear us. Okay.
So basically, let's say we opened up a project site in, like, one in China, one in Korea, and one in India.
Mm-hmm.
They'll definitely be sharing the collaboration server and the virtual display system. That will be sharing.
That's so Q, right?
Yes.
Brings up a really good question. My mental model was that there's one of these at each site. But there doesn't have to be. Okay. We could have, you know, one collaboration at the home site server, and maybe you probably want to have a repository. You know, these guys probably want to be local because there's an awful lot of traffic constantly flowing around here. Okay. But you definitely could. You could envision. That not all of this is at every site. There is a counter argument. If we're doing this virtual display system, that is very tightly coupled. You know, a lot of stuff is happening really quickly, and so you probably want to make local. But very likely what you would have is the collaboration server at the home site would be a distinguished server. It might have privileges and a little bit of functionality that all the satellites didn't have. Okay.
Yeah, like,
really good idea.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about, and there's a very worth exploring on your, you know, in your document.
And then to follow up to that, like, each site would have their own client repository server in there.
I think that would be very likely because hardware isn't that expensive. And there's an awful lot of traffic flowing, you know, notifications and messages and stuff. And, you know, does the team, and well, some of the notifications, so it's interesting, some of the notifications there probably would want to be a routing mechanism so that some of the notifications stayed local and some of the notifications went to everybody globally. A whole bunch of interesting questions. I'm glad you brought that up because I really hadn't thought about that too much. That's a really interesting. So pat yourself on the back. It's a good thing to think about. Yes, payment.
If we are going to distribute the load into multiple servers, like if we distribute repository, how do we make sure that the data is, you know, like
So when you're scaling out, there can be synchronization issues. Am I storing, trying to, see, what you want to do when you scale out, you want, to the best of your ability, not to have replication of the same stuff on all those scaled servers. You really don't want that. What you want is unique stuff on each server so that you don't have tons and tons of synchronization to do. This isn't like database replication. We don't want to be in that business if we can help it. And so, you know, if I have we'll see that the build server and the repository servers, they're not going to be very heavily loaded. I just don't think they're, you know, I don't think there's much reason to have more than one of those at a local site. It's the test harnesses that we're going to have lots of, and there really isn't a synchronization issue with a test harness. It's just each test harness is running tests from individual developers, and if we're logging the test results and storing them in the repository, which is a very rational thing to do, then you know, we don't have any synchronization issues at all. We're just running different parts. Okay. Yes.
Also looking at the requirements.
Rohit.
Yes.
Right.
Looking at the requirements, seems that collaboration server and virtual display server have overlapping responsibilities.
Yeah, so virtual display system, that's the way the reason I drew it here. Virtual display system is really probably controlled by and managed by the collaboration server. It definitely is a collaboration activity. You know, we're doing virtual meetings on that virtual display, and we're displaying data for the whole team and stuff like that. So.
But where do we draw the boundary that this is the responsibility of collaboration server, or this is the responsibility of virtual display server?
Whatever you think it ought to be. Okay. There isn't one answer to that. There isn't a wrong answer. You know, there's practical and impractical answers, and you know, I want you to think about that. Yes, okay.
Would you mind describing 2 or 3 critical subsystems for this project? Like, I'm thinking virtual display system is a critical subsystem for collaboration server, and for database for repository server. I'm not sure what would be a critical subsystem of test harness or client.
So remember that what we're really focusing on is the storage management subsystem, and that is the NoSQL database coupled with the messaging system that it's basically Project 4. Okay. Our storage management subsystem is Project 4 with wrappers that make it easy to use on each of those, you know, on each of the various servers. So that data management subsystem, COM, and the NoSQL database are the critical parts of the storage management subsystem.
What about like message makers, the class you created to wrap them?
That's part of, isn't that part of, that sounds to me like part of the storage management system.
And for client, it reads the same things.
Clients are going to use the storage management subsystem just like, so, and there's going to be, ideally, a lot of that code is common across all the servers and the clients. But clearly there'll be some code that isn't common. And you want to think about that. Why wouldn't, you know, what would make code be different? Well, there's different functionality. You know, the database elements for the repository are not going to be the same as the database elements for the test harness, are not going to be the same as the database elements for the collaboration server. Okay.
Can you think of any awful ideas in terms of threads? Because like I was thinking with Project 4, we could just tell it we want 5 threads, you know, and with a global system, I'm not sure how people would decide that.
I don't think we have to worry too much about the threading policies here. That's really is more implementation. We're interested in the concept. You know, what we want to do is we want to be at the point where when we're done, okay, yeah, we can build it. Let's just start building. We know what to build. We know what to do, but it doesn't mean that we know every single line of code. It doesn't mean that we know, you know. Well,
we talked about frustrated customers. I would hate for people at one team to not really be able to communicate.
So here's I think what your issue is, you want to make the system as responsive as you can, okay? And you definitely want to think about that a little bit. But I don't know that that will boil down, getting down as far as the individual threading policies and stuff. It could, but, you know.
I
you
don't
know,
know what
remember,
else.
well, for example, we're talking about here, worrying about the latency when
Yes.
we're remotely, and so, you know, that's exactly that, you know, trying to make this responsive. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a direct client-to-client interconnect without going through the core part of our data management system, storage management system, okay?
I actually thought we were using threads to do that.
Well, you are, but the
Oh.
threads are down, you know,
Okay.
down below our field of view right now.
Thank you.
Other questions? We have half an hour. I got to go to a meeting in half an hour.
When talking about communication system, when in project 4 we had this WCF services and data contracts, do we need to talk about these WCF services and data contracts in this also?
Only if you think the fundamental messaging structure needs to change. So you know, the data contract that we used in Project 4 was very generic. You know, to and from and an XML body, and with that XML we can describe anything we want to. Now, the only reason to change that is to say, gee, it may be faster if we, you know, in this particular case. So here, for example, I wouldn't be using XML wrappers. I would have a known, you know, real quick, maybe I'm just sending some JSON data or something like that, some real quick, easy to manage data rather than pulling up an XML document and crunching through that, because speed is absolutely essential there. So, but for any place else, I'm not sure that there's any real issue. Maybe for logging, you know, for logging you might choose a different message, but you know, I'll leave that up to think about. Yes?
Do you think JSON is faster than XML?
Yeah, usually it is, as long as you see. JSON is just an array of key value pairs, and there isn't a whole bunch of parsing of angle brackets and all that sort of stuff. So for simple stuff, JSON is faster. But JSON can be much harder to say complex things with. XML we can structure any way we need, and we can convey really complicated information with XML that's harder to do with JSON.
Can you give an example of those?
For example, when I'm checking in and checking out, well, when I'm checking in, you know, there's quite a bit of information. I have a whole bunch of different packages that I'm checking in. There's dependency relationships. There's a bunch of, you know, information like that. I may want to say, I'm going to depend on these 3 packages that you don't have yet, you know, so keep it open. So there's a lot of stuff you have to say in those messages. But here in the VDS, all you have to say is, I'm drawing a line from this point to this point. Would you send me or give me a link to your videos? I would like to put some of those up on the college server. You know, look at them. If I'm not making a total fool out of myself, I'll put them up on the college server. Yes, question.
In the background, you said repository server using a configuration control system to store the source code. And what is a configuration control system? Does it like a NoSQL database to store?
So our configuration management system is just the system that's helping us manage versions. We talked about that a little bit in class, and in this document, I talk a little bit about right here, the version management. Okay, this is, you know, I'll go back up and make sure you know where the link is in just a second. But this is just talking about the version management, how we're going to interact with the versions and stuff. So that's configuration management. So I got this. Whoops. I got this by clicking on this link right here. This is the lecture statement from last time we met from Wednesday's class. I've forgotten. Well, I'll scroll up a minute. We'll see what it is. But it's this repository server project statement fall 13. That's the document that had described that configuration management. And that link is on the lecture 25 page. Okay. Other questions? You guys are doing a good job. A lot of you are doing a good job asking questions. Ronak.
Yeah, you need to talk more about agents.
I'll talk a little bit about them. So an agent is a very dedicated piece of software dedicated to a particular task, usually an analysis task or a control task, and almost always it involves traversing something. So for example, I might have an agent whose job was to find all the open check-ins and check their dates and send notifications to any author that had a check-in that was open for more than 3 days or something like that. So that agent is just a piece of software that knows how to walk through the dependency structure, all the stuff held in the repository, and look for those open check-ins. It knows where the check-ins are stored. It's just an element in the database. So it's just, basically that agent is probably just is really not navigating anything. It's just making queries against the database to find open check-ins. And I talked a little bit. I think it's an interesting idea. Each agent typically is hardwired to some kind of query or navigation, walking around stuff, looking for things. But there may be several different kinds of tasks associated with that. And so we could use what I did on the midterm, the question in midterm 1, I think it was, enqueuing tasks for a thread to do. So you could have an agent that just blocked on a blocking queue, waiting to get a task, and the task might be find open check-ins, or the task might be run metrics on code packages, or whatever. There's lots of possibilities there's possibilities for agents all over this system. You want an agent is basically just a way to make use of the system easier for human beings. I can say, agent, go up and do this. One mental model is an agent is like a summer. So you're out working, you've been working for 3 or 4 years, and your company is bringing in summer interns, and they assign a summer intern to you, and you tell the summer intern, go find that intern, go do this for me, go do that for me. Okay. That's the summary. So navigation, if I am doing metrics, for example, so I want to analyze function sizes and complexities. Okay. So now what that means is that I've got to visit all the packages in the repository, or maybe just the packages in the display subsystem, or whatever I ask for. So if it's the packages in the display subsystem, I would go to the root package in the display subsystem and navigate down that graph. Okay. So that's what I mean. And you would do that using the database, looking at the database, the children, So. Other questions? Yes, Ajit.
Requirement document says that discuss the behavior of data storage coordinator. What exactly do you mean?
We talked about the storage system being probably mostly distributed, but having a little bit of central stuff. That's the coordinator. Okay.
Professor, about the event managers, like, do they have any role in the communication between the servers? Because it looks like to me that everything is like an event here. If you're doing the check-in, it's triggering an event sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, do the event managers have a role in communication?
So when a test fails, it might be nice to notify everybody that depends on the package for which the test failed. Okay, that's an event manager that's doing that.
It's a limited responsibility, but
probably. I think that I wouldn't worry, I think what you want to do is you want to make a catalog of events and notifications and messages. They're really all the same thing. But in your message catalog, some of these are notifications, and some of them are, there's a fine distinction perhaps between an event and a notification. A notification is, I am sending some information, a little body of information to you maybe, but an event is just saying this thing occurred. But they're really, we could do just fine without distinguishing between them. That's a subtle distinction. So really everything here is, that's the beauty of a message passing system, is you don't have to have a unique whole new body of software to handle events, separate from your remote procedure calls. Now everything is a message, and a notification is just a particular kind of message. But the reason that message is flowing is different than some other message. Yeah?
Is it this event manager existed in every part of the SCF, each component in the SCF?
Well, the storage management subsystem is in each server.
So the event manager is also.
My mental model is that that's just part of the software management system.
Dr. Professor, what's he asking?
He's asking about, the question was, is the event manager part of, distributed across the system? And my answer was that my view is the event manager is just part of the storage management subsystem, and so yes, it is distributed across. But again, there is this question of what's central and what's distributed, and I'm leaving that up to you.
What makes something a data storage manager? Because the way I'm organizing mine, the repository is going to have the item, and so many others are going to reference it. So what would make the rest of them?
When you say the repository has those items, the repository has those items because its data storage subsystem is holding on to them. The repository has items because it has a data storage, a storage management subsystem that holds on to them.
So but you say that there will be data storage managers, plural.
Yeah, because the way the repository needs to access its data is different than the way the test harness needs to access its data.
And if the test harness actually has a path directing users to the repository, does that mean it still has data?
No, I don't think the test harness is going to direct users to the repository, but the test harness is going to send notifications to clients that test failed and stuff like that.
So would the test harness in that case still have a data storage manager? If it doesn't store data, it stores.
If nothing else, it's logging stuff. So it has logs.
And that's data storage, the logs. Okay.
Oh yeah. Data storage subsystem is holding on to. If you're going to hold on to something, the data storage system holds on to it. Obviously there's little fields in code and stuff like that, but when you conceive of some data that I'm saving, that's saved in the storage management subsystem. Yes, payment.
Yeah. No, for each server, we're gonna have a different DB element for storing data.
I think some of them will be different for sure, but you know, I don't want to sit here and elaborate exactly all the details. You know, I want you to think about it.
But one system keep track, like the SMS keep maintain all the DB elements, or
But SMS, there's an SMS part on the repository, there's an SMS part on the test harness. SMS is not one database that's sitting there in the middle of the system and everybody's talking to it. It's not. There's a database on the test harness, there's a database, maybe more than one. There's a database on the repository, there's a database in the collaboration server, and there may be a small central database too, okay? But this SMS is not one central database. You know, you think of SQL Server and you say, hey, I've got a SQL Server database on my system. You don't. You have a relational data manager that opens up a whole series of databases on your, you know, maybe 2 or 3 for an application. So, you know, this isn't that different. Each one of the servers is going to have their own storage, and that storage is tailored to what they need to do. I certainly don't want everybody talking to one central data manager, or I'll bring the whole system to a crawl while everybody waits on, you know, and the queues get bigger and bigger, everybody's waiting for these messages to filter through. Don't want to have that. But there are some things, like we said early in the class, there are some things where you probably want to store centrally, you know, in one place centrally. But not much. You want to make that as small as you can. Right? Make sense?
Do you mean the SMS is like an abstract class and then other servers and clients inherited it and then...
You could think of it that way. It's probably not implemented exactly that way, but you could think of it that way. So the question was, is SMS really an abstract class, and the repository derives a concrete class from that? You could think of it that way. I think it's possible you would choose to implement it that way, but that's I wouldn't want to say that it has to be implemented that way. But that's a good mental model for it. Okay, you're on, right?
Yes.
What's your first name? Kuyan. I can't pronounce it well. I'm sorry. I'll just call you On. Okay.
But what's the difference between messages and notifications?
Like I was saying here, there's not much difference. In a message passing system, there isn't much distinction between a message and notification, except for its purpose. You know, I'll send, if I want to know something about the stuff the repository is holding, I'll send it a query message. But when a check-in fails, I'll get a notification that said that event, you know, your check-in failed.
So do you mean just the contents are different?
Yeah, mostly the contents are different. Yeah. That's the beauty of a message passing system. That's really, the distinction goes away. In a remote procedure call system, they're very different systems, and they're engineered entirely differently. With a message passing system, it's really the same stuff. It's very flexible. 15 more minutes and I got to disappear. So yeah, best shot.
On the requirements page, could you please explain the third footnote?
Third footnote on the requirements page. Says, yeah. Okay, these clients are often processes that run on a developer's machine. SDF clients are not expected to provide compile. Oh yeah, so all I'm saying is that we're not trying to make the client be a total software development environment. Okay. Because Visual Studio, why would we rebuild Visual Studio? It wouldn't make any sense for us to do that. That's really all that's saying is. So, you know, don't think of compilation and editing and stuff as being a prime functionality of the server. It's not. The functionality of the server is to give you access into the repository and the test harness and collaboration server.
So is it that these applications that we use, compilers and editors, will they be provided?
Oh yeah. So our company is either going to use Visual Studio, NetBeans, Eclipse, or something. And we won't rebuild it. Unless you're IBM and then you try to rebuild everything. That's where Eclipse came from. Yes?
Can we open up the Project 5 the diagrams again?
Yeah.
So like in terms of like diagrams, like where would the software management system be located?
Okay. Now, you said software management system? See,
software.
I regret using that term.
Okay.
Had I to do it again, I wouldn't put it in. My mental model is the software management subsystem was the tailoring of SMS for the repository. But I caused more confusion than shed light using that term, okay? So to me, the software management system is just the storage management system tailored for this particular functionality. And I was going to give each of these a different name, and then I didn't, and I decided not, but somehow that software management subsystem name I didn't convert back to. So. But you know, if you've written but it's basically just focusing on it's the integration of SMS into the repository's functionality. And that's probably the most the integration part is probably most complicated for SMS into this. You know, that's why I had broken it out as a separate. Other questions?
Wouldn't use any plugin architecture in any of those?
Ask your question again.
Plugin architecture.
What architecture?
Plugin.
Plugin.
Plug-in.
Plugins would make a whole lot of sense. You're welcome to talk about it. Plugin architecture. So really, the question that Ruben asked toward the beginning about policies, you could do as a plugin architecture. A plugin architecture really is nothing more than a self-contained library. It doesn't have a whole bunch of dependencies out. That is presented to the rest of the system through an interface and an object factory. It's a component. Okay, and so now what we can just change DLLs since we're using a common factory and interface. We can just use different DLLs to plug in whatever we want, and you could do that sort of thing with policies. If you never mentioned the term plugin, you know, that wouldn't be a major catastrophe, but it's an interesting thing to think about and talk about a little bit. It's one way of structuring, out of many, we've talked about many different ways of structuring software this semester, and it's one viable way of structuring software. Other questions? Understand that we'll have class on Monday, and I don't know what the schedule says, but I'm going to be in class on Wednesday. I don't know whether there's a scheduled class then, or that's I think Tuesday might be the last day of classes. I'm not sure. But I will be in the classrooms on Wednesday. Monday I have an agenda, a few last things to talk about. Wednesday it'll be a session like this, just a question and answer session, you know, last minute before it'll be midnight of that night that the stuff is due. So I won't be after that Wednesday evening, so any of you that have to do midterm makeups, I'm going to disappear. I'm not going to answer email. I'm not going to answer any questions on Piazza, because I am going to be grading your projects. And that's absolutely full-time, everything I can possibly do to get done to get my grades in on time. So if you have questions about the midterm makeup, strongly suggest that you attempt to formulate your questions and ask them on or before Wednesday.
Dr. Fawcett, Lecture 27 says it's enterprise computing, web model, course summary, and help with Project 5. What next?
Yep. So. Well, it's mostly help. You know, most of that stuff I will have already talked about. So.
Okay.
It's going to be Project 5, and if anybody has questions about the spring classes, I traditionally talk a little bit about that.
And Monday we talk about enterprise computing.
By the way, guys, I have asked Rebecca to open up the 8 o'clock 687 section for all those CIS students that couldn't register for it. So you should be able to register for the 8 o'clock section of 687 for next spring if you wanted to do that.
Should we try to discuss the peer-to-peer part from enterprise computing in our project?
Our peer-to, you know, these guys are really peers, and you're just discussing them as they are. I mean, they're peers because, you know, not only do they accept requests, but they issue notifications and stuff. So they're really peers. Yes, sir.
How do we define a service? Is something which every component uses, or?
Yeah, mostly it's shared functionality. Functionality you're trying to share across. That's why the storage management subsystem is a service, and you might have a security service, might not. You know, so. Alrighty, yes.
Could you explain the last part of event?
Last part of what?
Event logger.
Event logger? I don't know what you mean about the last part. Are you talking about on this project statement? So where is it? In requirements? Yeah, event logger, okay. So, you mean this part right here?
Yes.
So this part asks that you use it. Here's what's really going on. This part asks you to use the WCF communication. So it's using the data management, the storage management subsystem to communicate. And this one is just working in process. Its interface is function call interface, not a message passing interface, probably, okay. So what you could do is, a nice, easy way to do this is simply to have this component worked out and then use this component to implement this. You're wrapping this guy, you implement this just as an in-process logger, and then this guy, you're using the storage management subsystem to provide that logging from anywhere. Okay. And it isn't too much, you know, my mental model is something, you're just going to take your project 4 and tweak, throw some parts of project 4 away and tweak it a little bit. Okay. I don't intend that these prototypes be a big, huge effort. You could get a lot of this. This is by far the easiest part of it. you could, a really good strategy would be to implement this, because you can do this really quickly. Implement this, go on, and then if you get to the due date without doing the other part, submit what you got. Will you get full credit for it? No, but you'll get a lot of the credit for it. Okay. Bishop.
So the clients, would they have separate processes and applications for interacting with the different parts, or will it be one, let's say, a GUI client that is interacting?
Well, remember that the GUI client should not be doing much of any processing on its own. It's just delegating. The GUI should be presenting data and preparing data for transmission. So the GUI has message processing and and display processing, and all the rest are just so now you got calls into other things. All right.
So you don't have a separate window for interacting with the repository and a separate one for the test?
You might. That's up to you. You might. What you don't want, very often when students do their first one or two GUIs, they have this one big huge window which has 1,000 widget little text boxes and buttons and stuff, and totally confusing and almost impossible to use. You don't want to do that. But you can have one window that has a tab display, or you can have separate windows, whatever seems to make sense. If you have some functionality you don't think is going to be, you think you're only going to use this at one time or this at one time and not switch back and forth a lot, then you might do them as separate windows. But a tab display works really nicely. I tend to favor them myself. So.
Exactly, we just have one client and we don't have multiple clients running on the same machine. So that's the level.
It's possible that you might have multiple clients running on the same machine. So here, for example, but you don't have to do almost anything. Okay, you can support this by doing nothing except implementing the way we've talked about. But for example, I might want to have a client that I'm using to talk to have a virtual meeting with the team in Chicago, and I have this other window into my local repository, so helping me think about stuff or find stuff or whatever. Okay, but mostly I would expect a client would be using one. I would expect that a user's machine would be supporting one client at a time most of the time, but it might have more than one instance of a client. But you really don't have to do, as long as you stick with the message passing schema, you really don't have to do anything special. You want to run two, you run two. Message passing is wonderful. So flexible and nice. Great. All right, I think we got to quit. I got to go to my meeting. So there won't be a help session next Friday. I will be in class on Monday, and I will be in class on Wednesday. Whether or not classes are officially over, I don't remember. But I will be in the classroom both Monday and Wednesday.
But the TAs are here still next week, though, right?
The TAs have to start studying for their own exams. So, you can ask questions on Piazza, and
okay.
I'll talk to the TAs a little bit, but I can't ask them to hold office hours. And I'm not going to ask them to hold office hours, but
okay,
because they have their own exams to do, and we got to be fair to them. They got to keep their GPAs up.
Sure. So next week, will you have office hours?
I will have office hours on Monday and Wednesday, but I won't be here.
You make that so clear that you're gone.
Yep.
Thanks, Dr. Fawcett.
I will be looking at Piazza until Wednesday. Yes, I will.